And Aubrey tells us how on that day in this temple, standing in the dark, Isis came to him and gave him a message, gave him a direction that he needed to take in his life. And what she said to him was, you need to have children with both these women. You're listening to the Heartbreak Alchemy Podcast with Alaska Wolf. So this week has been a really big week inside of the spiritual community. There's been a lot of big revelations, a lot of big reactions, a lot of big opinions. And all of these opinions and thoughts and musings are all related back to one of the most recent podcasts that Aubrey Marcus has put out with his wife, Vylana. It's called A New Pattern of Sacred Relationship Emerges. And it's where they actually go on to discuss how they are opening up their sacred union marriage to become what they're calling radical monogamy. And so if you haven't been following along with this story and you have no idea what they mean by radical monogamy, how they actually explain it is that it's no longer a monogamy of two, but rather this expanded monogamy. Meaning that there would be monogamy between Aubrey and Vylana, but also Aubrey and Alana, Aubrey's new girlfriend. And if you are hearing that for the first time and your initial reaction is like this collective eye roll, then you would be in line with a big proportion of the people that are reacting to this news, this announcement, this podcast over the last number of days. And, you know, I've got to be honest that there was really some resistance to making this podcast. Like, I had to slow myself down and take a little bit of time to go back and listen to the podcast a number of times, because I really found upon the first listen, like, there was this big reaction to what was being shared because so much of it just felt so cliche. And there was a part of me that felt a bit activated by it. And I really wanted to spend the time allowing myself to explore what was the reaction from maybe my own sensitivities, from my own experience in my life, and where was there just a more global, collective, feminine reaction to what was happening on that podcast in real time for us to listen to. And that was something I needed a little bit of time to reckon with. I also really wanted to spend some time going back to some old podcasts of Vylana and Aubrey that they shared at the very beginning of their relationship, where they spoke about the transition that they were both making from open relationship to sacred union, and this beautiful story and narrative and experience that they shared about what it was to come into this sacred union that they were really valuing and committing to and allowing to be central in how they lived their lives. Because for me, those podcasts at the time were extremely impactful, especially given where I was in my life. And full disclosure, like, I've been somebody that's followed Aubrey Marcus's journey from before he was even with Vylana because of my own experience in the world. So as many of you guys know, I was in a relationship many years ago that was extremely challenging. A lot to do with the fact that my partner wanted an open relationship. And so this is just a little bit of preamble to give you guys context from where I'm coming from when I'm discussing this larger context of Aubrey and Vylana and their whole relationship, because maybe it's pertinent to how I see things and my own experience and my own sensitivities. And I just want to make you guys aware of what those things are also, so you can, you know, hold all of this within the broader context that it is. And so my own relationship was this very push-pull relationship where he wanted open relationship and I absolutely didn't want that. Like, my vision of love was very much the way I love, which is an all-inness. There's a loyalty, there's a respect, there's a wanting to do everything together, to build together, to create together, to really have this shared mission in the world. And at the time, I probably didn't even have language for that, you know, like I just wanted to be chosen. I wanted to be loved. And I was really in a stage of my life where I was extremely wounded. Like I hadn't done any healing at that point. I mean, I had done a little bit of therapy, but I was really still making my choices, especially in my love relationships, from this very wounded place. And so even though I knew that my partner wanted this open relationship and I didn't want that, I still got into that relationship. I still chose to walk into that relationship knowing that he wanted an open relationship, because my point of view was he hasn't ever been loved right. He's always been cheated on. I'll fix him. My love will fix him. I'll just like love him enough that he won't want this, was my thought process. And you know, that question of open relationship really never went away inside of our relationship. And in many ways, there was a part of me that was exploring the concept of open relationship, looking desperately, honestly, for any models of what a healthy open relationship could look like in the world. And there were very few. In my own kind of circle, that was not how anybody I knew related. In his circle, my ex-partner's circle, he had a few people that operated that way, but they were, I would have said, much more advanced spiritually than we were at that time in our lives. Like, one was a therapist, and she would speak to me from time to time and, you know, helped me explore whether I wanted an open relationship or not. But ultimately, I was going out into the world searching for models, and I came across Aubrey Marcus. Now, Aubrey Marcus at the time was in a relationship with somebody called Whitney Miller. And this is going back like probably around 8 years or so at this point. And he had a very public polyamorous relationship with Whitney Miller that they really lauded online and shared a lot about online as this beautiful, explorative, fun, wild exploration that they were in. And they really showed, like, I would say, really like the Instagram version of this relationship. You know, it was very much like, this is great. She's got a boyfriend. I've got a girlfriend. I've got 3 girlfriends. It's so fun. It's so beautiful. And, you know, I took in that content, but there was just always a part of me, and I don't know if this was because, you know, I just didn't want that relationship style for myself, and so I was just trying to poke holes in it. But like, I don't know that I ever really bought it, you know? Like, I don't know that I ever really thought like, yeah, this really looks like healthy and generative and like it's creating more than it's taking from these people, or like that the relationships that are created from this open place, like the multiplicity of them really adds up to the depth of one monogamous relationship. And so from my point of view, I always had like kind of one eye open when I was taking in that content. And towards the end, or I would say at the end of that relationship of Aubrey and Whitney Miller, they separated because of complications inside of their open relationships. One of her relationships got more serious, and then she got engaged to the other man, and then ultimately they broke up. And, you know, when this happened, there was a part of me that was like, yeah, I knew it. And that feeling really was vindicated, I guess. I would say vindicated because at the time it felt like I could show my partner and be like, see, it doesn't work. But they put out a podcast together, and they put out this really long, in-depth podcast talking about the truer truth, like the not so Instagrammable version of their relationships and how things actually went down, and like the depth of the misery that they experienced in some moments, and the ways in which they were hurting each other and really tapping into those wounds that they were both holding, and like how that relationship was so much of a trigger, but it was also an expression of their wounds, right? And I really remember being really affected by the way that Aubrey and Whitney were talking about the end of their relationship, to like just how toxic it got, how this relationship style was very much an expression of their wounds, and the way in which they were searching like insatiably for this external validation of love, of attention, of care that they ultimately were not giving to themselves. And these are not my words. Like, this is the way in which Aubrey actually describes it in this podcast, and also in a separate podcast that he did later on with Vylana. Like, that in many ways, the polyamory that he was choosing was a way for him to source the love he was so desperate for. And so there was this like constant, insatiable need for more partners, because if I get love from this person and this person and this person, then it'll finally mean that I'm good. And Aubrey discusses on another podcast that he made later on just how, like, even when he had 3 girlfriends, there was still this little voice inside of him that was saying, like, oh yeah, but the fourth one is really going to be where that love really hits home, you know? And that really affected me deeply. Being in this relationship with my ex-partner who was not somebody that was, you know, the word spiritually evolved is how I'm talking about it, but I mean even just like in his healthy masculine, like he was not somebody that was going to be capable of the kind of communication, and nor was I. Let me be very blunt about that. Nor was I. We together were not going to be a couple that were going to be capable of that kind of relationship, not in a way that it could be healthy or functional. And so, you know, listening to that podcast with him and Whitney was very profound in my life. And so fast forward a few years later, I was not somebody that was keeping up with Aubrey Marcus's relationship status, but all of a sudden, he posted a podcast called The Sound of Love with Vylana Marcus, number 268, if you want to go back and check it out. And this was the reintroduction of Vylana, not just as somebody that he was dating, but as the woman that he was in sacred union with. And this was another podcast that Aubrey made that was so goddamn impactful for me. Like, oh my God. I remember listening to this podcast in my bed in Berlin and just like crying because it was so incredibly beautiful. It was truly like the embodiment of everything that I would have loved my ex-partner to say to me, to give to me, to show up for me as. And just like really listening to this podcast was so powerful. Because in many ways, this podcast and the love that they described was so much, like it was such a beautiful mirror of everything I ever wanted from my ex-partner. It was a mirror of the relationship that I desired, this beautiful, co-creative, power match relationship where each person's contribution to the other actually allows the other to grow and to evolve and to expand and to be more and to be bigger and to be shinier and to just be more successful and more loving. And just like this relationship, this podcast, it filled me with so much hope. It just filled me with so much hope because I was like, this man, Aubrey Marcus, is somebody that really, for me, was somebody that I respected. I respected his honesty. I respected his work. I respected the way that he was willing to be seen in the world. And in many ways, this podcast that he made with Vylana, describing their love, their union, and the way in which they were going to dedicate themselves to each other, forsaking all others, was so beautiful. It was so powerful to me. And I remember being so deeply affected by this podcast because it was just such a moment in my life where I was like, what I want is possible. And this is proof. And I'm going to take a big breath on that one. And I want you to take one as well. Because I know that I'm not alone in having this experience. I know that there are many women out there for whom Aubrey Marcus has become this talisman of sacred union, of a relationship with somebody that truly loves and elevates his woman, his queen. And I think in many ways that is why the podcast that we have heard most recently from him has actually felt so shattering. And so for anybody that hasn't listened to the podcast, basically what was happening was Aubrey was sitting down with his wife Vylana and his new lover/girlfriend Alana, as well as this man called Dr. Mark Gafni. And so I just want to give you a little bit of context into who Dr. Gafni actually is, because I think it's a really important thing to know who the guide is of this exploration that they're doing, of this exploration into open relating or radical monogamy. There is a man leading them that is their support system, that is their guide, that is giving them structures and pieces of wisdom around the way that they can frame things in their mind. And so I think it's really important to know that this man that they have hired as their guide is a man that actually has multiple women that have accused him over many decades of sexual misconduct inside of his spiritual practice. They have alleged that he has used his spiritual authority to coerce them into doing sexual acts. There's also allegations of him being involved with a minor. This man is also somebody that supports Israel and the IDF in quite an outspoken way. And I think all of those pieces of information give you a very clear idea of this man's character. When you are listening to this man give his wisdom, speaking specifically to the women and speaking specifically to and about Aubrey. And so they open up this podcast talking broadly about relationships. Aubrey is speaking about his own past with open relationships and polyamory and how that worked and didn't work. He's also talking a lot about how he saw in his peers around him with his friends, he would see a lot of the men cheating on their wives. I mean, he alludes that the women were also doing it, but it feels very much like he's focused on the men that were at his level in his kind of line of business or like kind of becoming a little bit famous in the world. He saw a lot of those peers cheating on their partners around him. And he saw how it was affecting them, like with stomach problems and health issues. And like he really put that down to being the lying that had to happen inside of those relationships, the lack of integrity. And it was just an interesting frame that was set very early inside of this podcast to really allow us to kind of have the frame that like there's only two options in the world. This is what it felt like to me. Like there's only two options. You either have a relationship that can be open or you'll have somebody that cheats. And that I think was quite intentional. You know, that framing of like, well, everybody else is doing it. And it's something that was kind of repeated throughout the podcast where there's a lot of talk about how modern relationships are in collapse and they're crumbling and like so many people cheat and so many people are out of integrity and like there's this chaos of relationship, which, you know, we can't disagree with that. Like relationships, modern relationships are in struggle right now. And yet it kind of felt like a false equivalence to me because it kind of felt like that was the setup for the rest of the story that came afterwards about the opening of this relationship, about the, you know, loss of eros that they talk about a lot throughout this relationship. And I really thought that framing was really interesting and strategic, actually. And so from this setup, they move over to talking to Vylana about her own relationship history. And so for her, she really takes that setup and runs with it. She's like, yeah, the relationships that I've been having have really been part of the 70% of people that are cheating and out of integrity. And like, you know, this is my experience of relationships where there's always something more to know. Like there's something that's been hidden. There's something that isn't right inside of the relationship that hits me out of left field. And she speaks to how what she truly wanted in her relationships was this sense of safety and stability and reliability and like being radically chosen by her partner, which really felt like what she was getting with Aubrey. I mean, I think back to that past podcast they made when they were entering into this relationship and just thinking like, oh my God, she got it. Like she got everything she ever dreamt of. And isn't it so fucking beautiful? And there was this like slight sadness that I felt when I heard more about how, you know, there was this element of Aubrey always wanting this ish inside of their relationship, this little bit of squish around the edges where they could have sexual exploration with other people and other women. And it really felt like that was something that Vylana was acquiescing to. And I use that term intentionally because Vylana very much makes it clear that it is not her natural inclination to want to seek other people outside of her own relationship. Like she says that multiple times inside of this podcast and other podcasts, where in many ways, the reason that their relationship had openness around the edges was because of her desire to want to meet him in his desire, right? But what it actually meant for her was that she was constantly coming up against her edges, like the edges of comfort, the edges of safety, the edges of being in a relationship with somebody where you want to feel radically chosen, and yet there's also this other thing that exists inside of that relationship. And she really speaks to it being the most difficult initiation of her life. Like she's died so many times, like hundreds and hundreds of times inside of this relationship. And so what's really interesting to me here is that even though Vylana is talking about how challenging this relationship structure is for her, how she doesn't truly have a natural inclination to desire this relationship structure like independent of Aubrey. Like she says specifically, she chooses this relationship structure freely for herself. She does say that. But because she wants to meet Aubrey where he is in his desire, right? And so I just found it really interesting that at this moment in time, Dr. Gafni, or Gafni, as I'm going to call him, because doctor is way too much respect for this man, he really jumps in at this point to say and to specify that even though this relationship structure is not equivalent in that Aubrey has different or more or deeper relationships than Vylana has with exterior people, it is reciprocal. Like he really wants to double and triple and quadruple down on the fact that there is a reciprocity inside of this relationship. And that really may be true. Like I don't deny in any case that Aubrey is a man that is surely capable of deep love and true respect and a lot of generative things inside of his relationship. Like I would never take away that element of who he is because I do believe he has that. But I just really felt like this moment in time really missed the mark for me. Like there was something about it that really felt disingenuous. And I don't know if that was because there was so much of Gafni's commentary that I just found so disingenuous and so like gaslighting and so like, why is this man here? You know, like he even jumped in at this moment in time to also like list off about 20 other men, like powerful men that had like uncommon arrangements inside of their relationships, basically saying like every powerful man that's ever done anything great has had to have more than one woman. And so for me, that was really just like this really poignant patriarchal blind spot where two men were discussing how, you know, really great, important men in the world, they really need more than one woman because otherwise they can't be happy. They can't be satisfied. They can't truly do what they're meant to do in this world. And like, it just felt like such a blind spot that neither of them could clock how misogynistic this was, how misogynistic this felt. That like men have to have this separation. They have to have like this wifey character and then they have to have this like concubine character where they can go and have like great sexual adventure with one and then the other one is to hold them up inside of their life. And like that just felt like such a cliche to me, man. It really made me feel like, oh. There was many moments inside of this podcast where my whole body was just like, ugh. But this was definitely one of them, you know, because of the cliche, because of the misogyny, because of like all of these things that were kind of unseen by the men in the room. And that made me really sad because I held a lot of respect for Aubrey. And there was a lot of moments inside of this podcast where I felt that respect like receding greatly. It really felt like there was moments of blindness and I felt really sad about that. And so the story moves on. And they're talking a little bit more about how they actually ended up spending a little bit of time in Miami. And while they were in Miami, they were on Raya. Now, Raya is like a high-end Tinder, so it's for people with a profile. It's for famous people. It's like that little bit more exclusive. And they were just on Raya. I guess they had like a couples profile maybe. I'm not too sure how it works. But it seemed like they had a couples profile that said they were just looking for friends. And Aubrey was kind of saying like we weren't really using it. We weren't really looking. We were coming to the end of our time. So it was kind of like whatever. And Vylana jumps in and she says like, oh no, I was looking all the time. I was looking all the time to see if we could find anybody. And I just found that really fascinating. And why this statement felt so poignant for me was because in my own experience of being in a relationship with somebody that wanted an open relationship and having that space of exploration around all of these topics and all of these different really nuanced elements of open relationship, something that felt really specific to me was the difference between a relationship in which you have an understanding of openness where it's like, if the universe brings somebody into your reality that you feel a connection with, there is the openness theoretically that you have with your partner to explore that connection, right? And then something that felt very separate to me in my experience was being in a relationship where you were on dating apps, actively seeking out people, strangers, wanting that, eliciting that, going after that, seeking out that extra person or extra people. And maybe if you haven't been in a relationship that was ever more than two or kind of even had that question around it, that differentiation may not mean too much. But I also want you to feel into it for a minute, because I really feel like there is quite a big difference between being open to the universe and actively searching. And so I just want you to hold that yourself. And so they continue the conversation, and they're just talking about how they're in Miami and they were down in the gym doing their workout. And all of a sudden, Aubrey got this message, a message from God, that told him that he needed to go on Raya and find somebody that was really important, that was really going to be important for him. And I know this is the point in the podcast where a lot of people tapped out. There's this moment and one other moment in the podcast where a lot of people were just like, Aubrey, sit down, like, son. But that's what he said. You know, God told him to go on Raya, and he did. And he saw a picture of Alana, and he messaged her. And again, in this moment, it was interesting to me because Vylana cuts in and she's kind of like, oh, he showed me right away. There was just something about the way that she interjected there that really felt like in that moment, she just really wanted to be included in that element of the story, that moment of the story. And, you know, we can all have our own opinions about why that was. But for me, it just felt like there was something important about her being included in that moment and in that relationship that was starting to evolve, or that was in that moment of possibility of that relationship. And so that interpretation is my own, of course. I can't know what she was thinking in that moment. I can't know what she felt in that moment, but it comes from not only what I felt listening to that interjection in that moment, but also to a lot of the podcasts that I've listened to with Vylana in the past that really go more into the depth of like her wounding around love and attention being split. And so that felt like a really poignant moment inside of that relationship, right? And so this is where Alana enters the picture, where she enters Aubrey and Vylana's relationship, where she enters into the scene, and we're introduced to her as a 28-year-old model, something that Aubrey goes out of his way to mention inside of this podcast, which felt a little strange, but okay. And she really talks a little bit about how she felt really lost in her life at this moment. And she had just gotten out of a relationship. She was searching for something. She was searching to be seen. She was searching for, she didn't know what. She was transitioning careers. She was just looking for something in her life. And they talk about how they spent a day. They went and got coffee and got food, and the girls got along really well. And, you know, they were just talking about the blossoming of this relationship. And then they go into the story of their second date. Now, on their second date, Vylana and Aubrey invited Alana over to do the God Bomb ceremony. Now, for anybody that has no clue about Aubrey Marcus and Vylana, then you'll have no clue about the God Bomb ceremony. But basically, it's a ceremony facilitated by Vylana and Aubrey, where it is a combination of plant medicine, body work, and healing / vocal kind of work that's done by Vylana. And from what I understand about this ceremony, it's incredibly powerful, incredibly vulnerable, really opens you up in a way that perhaps is not something that you would normally experience on a second date. And so this just felt notable to me, right? Because there's already so much swirling inside of this dynamic where it's like, on a societal level, there's so much happening. And then there's also bringing in this dynamic of this spiritual practice that they are offering to Alana. Now, listen, I really believe that both Aubrey and Vylana are really in integrity when they are doing this work. But I just think it's interesting and notable because like you have so much happening. You have this relationship that's opened, and that's mostly because of the man's desire. You have the man then wanting to connect with this younger woman. You have this younger woman entering the fray, and there being this kind of spiritual authority imbalance because of his power and his authority and his experience, and her searching for something outside of herself, this to be seen, to be known, to be like, to have a different path in life, right? And so those things are just like in the ether right now for me. There's something that feel noteworthy, and I'm not going to put too much emphasis on them, but it's just something to note as we're listening to this story, as we're like watching this whole thing unfold. And so the date went well, the God bomb date went well, and Alana really spoke to how this experience made her feel seen in this way that she had never really felt seen before, you know? She had spoken before about feeling lost in her life, like she had lost direction, like she was looking for something. And in many ways, it felt like this experience tied her to something greater than herself that she was looking for, which obviously would have been a very profound experience to have on a second date. And like, I can understand why that would have forged this connection with these two people in this way that felt really, really powerful. And in the discussion around the ritual that they did that night, the God bomb, there was actually a lot of flattery heading from Aubrey to Vylana about how she had performed inside of that ceremony, how she had sung so beautifully, how things were like so incredible. And for whatever reason, they decided that that was down to the presence of Alana in the space, even though she was on the bodywork table and she was the one receiving. Like, there was something about Alana being there that brought out Vylana's gifts in a greater way. And I could have taken this at face value, like that could also be completely what was meant and experienced. And there was just a part of me that kind of questioned whether this was also something that was a little tactical, like this way of connecting Vylana's gifts and her power and the beauty of her work to this external source in Alana, saying that it's something that amplified what she could already do. And like, that is just a question that came up for me. I'm not saying that's how it is. I'm just saying that like, that was a question that crossed my mind, because in this moment that felt like a way to bond the two together, which obviously worked out for Aubrey because he also wanted to have more time with this girl and to spend more time with her and see her more. And so from that moment, they decided that Alana should also join them on their travels. They were going to be traveling more around the world, moving from Miami next to Egypt, and Alana got invited along onto the trip. And so for some reason here, the doctor jumps in and he starts talking about how Aubrey and Vylana would also be choosing this if they were poor. Now, if this feels like a non sequitur to you as well, you wouldn't be alone, because it really felt like it made no sense inside of this conversation. Like, why this man said this, I have no idea. Why it's relevant, I have no idea. He really went into detail trying to say like, oh yeah, even you guys aren't just like people flitting around the world, even though that's exactly what they were describing. He said you would even do it if you were poor. Like, this has nothing to do with being rich and bored, basically. And I just thought that was interesting as an interjection. Like, didn't really make much sense to me, didn't seem relevant, and really felt like a lot of things in this podcast, like the way that the doctor was speaking, the words he was using, there was like an intentionality around using certain words. Like, if you're listening to the whole podcast, you'll hear the word integrity about 50 times. You'll hear the word purity like a number of times, like a weirdly big amount of times. He interjects with these little thoughts of like, oh, you'd do it if you were poor. This isn't to please the man. Like all of these things where it's like, it's almost as though there was certain arguments that they knew the world was going to have upon listening to this podcast, and they wanted to get in front of them. They wanted to have already addressed them inside of the podcast. And so for me, it really felt like there was things that he wanted to say because he wanted to get ahead of those arguments, and I think that's also why they were coming to this podcast with the term radical monogamy in the field of mystics or whatever they were calling it, because obviously, Aubrey has been really vocal in the past about polyamory and the ways in which it did not work for him. He's been very clear that he saw his choices in polyamory being around his own wounding, around his own lack of self-love, his desire to have more love from the external because he wasn't capable or able to give it to himself. And like, those are things that you can go and listen to in other podcasts of his, as I've done kind of doing my research here. And I just really felt like some of these things that the doctor was saying and the things he was dropping in, and specifically the words, like, if something's truly an integrity, you don't typically have to hammer home that point by saying it over and over and over, And so those were just noteworthy things. So regardless, they continue on and they're going all together on this trip to Egypt. They're going to go down the Nile. They're going to spend some time in Egypt visiting these temples and visiting this holy land. And on one of the first days when they're in Egypt, having this beautiful mystical experience, they go into the temple of Isis, the Holy of Holies. And they're walking around, somebody's doing an activation. They're really just like soaking in the magic of this space. And Aubrey tells us how on that day in this temple, standing in the dark, Isis came to him and gave him a message, gave him a direction that he needed to take in his life. And what she said to him was, you need to have children with both these women. And I absolutely know, because I've spoken to a lot of you, that this is where a lot of you turned off the podcast and you were just like, Aubrey, like, you need to get a grip, my guy. Like, you need to get a grip. And I think for a lot of other people, like, this moment in the podcast was just like, Aubrey, if you want to claim that desire, then claim it. But please don't utilize like this external, mystical third party to convince these women and also to claim to the world that this is, the direction of a higher being. And I think a lot of people in that moment just really felt like, who is this guy? Because there was definitely people that heard a man say, God told me to have children with two different women. And they just rolled their eyes. They kind of laughed. They thought, what? Okay, my guy. And they just like turned off the podcast and that was the end of it. It was like a funny story to talk to their friends about. And then I really feel like there's another group of people that, maybe have had some religious trauma, maybe haven't been involved in spiritual communities where there are powerful leaders, where they are very persuasive and they have a lot of charisma. And they've heard things like this, whether it be through their own direct experience or it's something that they know about through research or just knowledge of how things go often in these spiritual communities. And this was an echo of that, where a powerful, charismatic leader of a group of people start to really be drinking their own Kool-Aid to the point that they really believe that in some way they, their children, them, their beliefs, their way of like moving through the world needs to be something that is propagated with multiple women. And I'm not in any way saying that Aubrey is like starting a cult. Like, I'm just not saying that, right? But also, there have been a lot of men that have preceded Aubrey who have been in similar positions that have given a similar rhetoric, like this idea, their need to spread their seed, their need to have babies with multiple women to like bring on the new earth, and like all of these things. And like, I'm not saying that we need to get hysterical about this by any means, but I think there's something in the Kool-Aid, you know? I think there's something in the Kool-Aid. And so this framing of like, God sent me the message to have children with both women, it does put it into a different context, because now this desire that Aubrey holds is not just about having sex with two women. It's not just about having relationships with two women, but now it's this like spiritual decree. And I really feel like Vylana specifically, I don't really know much about Alana, but Vylana specifically, you can feel from the way that she speaks and the things that she says and her way of moving through the world is that she really believes in a different future, you know, and she definitely feels as though herself and her children are a big part of that. Even in this podcast, she made mention from time to time to like, the kids that she has are going to be important to the world. And it just really felt to me like, now that this has entered the territory of being about this bigger mission, it almost makes it harder to say no to. And this to me just feels like a very subtle, but definitely there, manipulation. And I would almost say coercion. And I don't know how that lands with you. Like, in the context of this relationship, in the context of this podcast, which is all we have to go on, like, I want to make that very clear. Like, we don't have all the context. But, like, it really just doesn't feel neutral to me. And knowing that this desire, this decree from God has come to so many men who really use spirituality to kind of cloak their own ego, it just left me with more questions than I had before he said those words, you know? So at this point in their story, in their experience, Aubrey froze, apparently, because he had heard this voice, he had heard this direction come from God, and he really froze up. And that energy clearly rippled out throughout their group, right? And so Vylana was trying to understand what had happened, and she kept on asking him, and he was avoiding the conversation until they got home that night. And then when they got home that night, he told her what Isis had told him inside of the temple. And this moment was such a poignant one in this podcast. Oh my God. Because like, you can only imagine the feeling that Vylana was having in that moment. You know, she really threw it back to this theme that she's spoken about so many times in her life and in this podcast of like, I choose something, I try my hardest to trust something, and then there's just something fucking else that comes out of left field and it hits me. And I'm just like never safe, really, is what it felt like. And this was another moment of describing that she really just like felt like I was so open to this kind of uncommon arrangement. Like, I think she was speaking really about like even having the monogamish around her marriage. Like, I think in many ways, the way that Vylana speaks really says to me that she really desires a monogamous relationship. Like, she really holds that value of like being with one person and having this one mission and really going out there into the world, being this united front, you know? And in many ways, it just felt really tender to listen to her cry in that moment and to really like allow herself to be seen in such a vulnerable, such a painful moment in her life, where she just really had, you know, she had chosen this relationship. She had like wanted to trust him so much so that she even allowed like a little bit of exploration around the sides to like really satisfy his need. And it just really felt like, it felt so unfair, you know? like I really feel for her in that moment where it's just like, I trusted because you said I could trust. I let down my defenses. I surrendered to your desires because you said you would keep me safe. And then the very thing that I was so afraid of happening, it's happened. And even as I say that, I notice that I'm using the passive voice, like it happened. And I think that was because of the setup of like, God told me to have kids with you, because it makes it no longer related to Aubrey's choice and Aubrey's desire, right? And so even when I'm describing it, knowing that I very much see this as a choice and, a desire of Aubrey's that he's speaking to, you use the passive voice because he has kind of set that up in the way that he's laid this out, right? And so I just find that also to be like significant inside of this conversation, because, if he was just going to own the fact that he had this lightning bolt that's like, I want to have children with these two women, then that's a very different conversation than God told me, right? And that just is what it is. Now, something that really also was feeling important for me was the description of what happened after this experience inside of the Holy of Holies, the Temple of Isis, and the conversation that ensued afterwards. But it was just like kind of the description of a very dramatic space between the two of them, like Vylana was talking about how she was trying to take off her ring, and Aubrey was saying that he was trying to throw himself in the Nile. And like, full disclosure, like I have a little bit of reaction to that, like I can understand Vylana's reaction, but like the kind of feeling of Aubrey trying to throw himself in the Nile, like there's something about this that just hits on like, it just touches at this like edge of manipulation. Like, I hate this so much that I'm going to kill myself, And, maybe if you haven't been in a toxic relationship or experienced relationships where that kind of behavior has become commonplace or something that ever reared its ugly head, then maybe that wouldn't be so like significant or triggering. But if you have been in a relationship where your partner would have big reactions and then react in that way, like, oh, if this happens, I'm going to kill myself, or if this is true, then I'm going to kill myself, like that can actually be a way to manipulate your partner in a really big way. And so they're just like that comment about, oh, I'm going to throw myself in the Nile, like there was just something off about that for me, like that I didn't like that. I didn't appreciate it. And like that could 100% be my own sensitivity to that, having experienced something like that. But I just want to put a pin in that, like, so that we can be aware of like what that can actually be in terms of impact on another person. And Vylana speaks at this point about like, I don't know if I could ever choose that, like I don't know if I could ever choose that not only do I share my husband with another person, I split the attention that something is so dear to me, but like I actually choose that he has children with another woman. And, she also speaks about how she eventually was able to feel like maybe I could choose it, like maybe it could be beautiful. And so like, there is the two sides to this. And I guess I'm curious to see as time progresses, like where the real truth lies in those two kind of opposing feeling thoughts that she had, right? Because I remember in my own journey, when I was going through this relationship with somebody that wanted an open relationship, something I did a lot was take a lot of ketamine. But I took a lot of ketamine because ketamine allowed me to dissociate so much that I started to be able, or I thought I started to be able, to push myself into a space where I thought I could accept this open relationship. And some people will say like maybe the ketamine was turning off like your frontal cortex. Maybe you were not so connected to the fear that you felt around it. Like maybe you were more connected to a place of love. And then other people will say like, yeah, it was just turning off your like awareness of how unsafe you felt. It was turning off your connection to the instability inside of the relationship. And I think both of those things are true, Like in many ways, there were moments where I was trying very much to convince myself that I could want something that my partner wanted because I wanted to be with my partner so much. And so that was just something that came up for me when I heard her say that. I'm like, I'm really curious. And like, I'm sure she's really curious as well, Like, I don't know that would be something that would be immediately something you could even give any idea about. And I really believe that Vylana's done a lot of work on herself. And so I know that in time she will find that space of like what's truly right for her. But I just thought it was like an interesting thing to witness in that moment, and really gave me a reflection on those moments in my own life where I was trying to want something that I didn't want because I wanted the prize of like my partner. And, even in listening to this podcast, there was a lot that pointed to Vylana really questioning what sacrifices she could make of herself in order to have the relationship she has with Aubrey. And it's also something that really, again, came up with the doctor, like the Dr. Gafni or fucking Gafni. Gafni really started to press on this as a point. They were like, what will you give up in order to have this relationship? Like, what will you sacrifice to have this relationship? And they made a whole big conversation piece around the difference between compromise and sacrifice. And this was fascinating to me because in all of the question of sacrifice, I didn't hear once what Aubrey's sacrifice was. I heard it from the women. Vylana was sacrificing monogamy. She was sacrificing a sense of safety. She was sacrificing even being the wife and mother, singular, of Aubrey's children. Like these were very big sacrifices that felt like they were on the table for her. For Alana, she spoke to not being able to like be, not she wasn't speaking in terms of like being the number one, but she said like, I sleep alone most nights and like that's challenging for me. And there's a depth to the relationships that I want that's systemically or like in terms of the way that we have to set up this relationship. Like I can't always get that. And so there was very obvious sacrifices that were being made by the women. But there was not a moment in this whole conversation around like, what are the sacrifices that Aubrey is making? What are the sacrifices Aubrey is making for his wife Vylana, for their marriage, for their sacred union? Like, one would actually assume that, as per their covenant, the sacrifice that would be made by Aubrey for Vylana and for their relationship, for their sacred union, for their children, for their lineage, for their work, for their mission, would be the connection with other women. And, that just felt like a really pointed, poignant, unspoken thing that hung in the air for me. I was like, okay, but what is the sacrifice that Aubrey is making to this relationship, this primary relationship, because that felt really significant and it felt really not said. And so in this moment, Vylana speaks a lot about the fundamental lack of safety that had entered the room for her. Like she had opened herself and her relationship and her world up to Alana, who is somebody that she deeply respects and cares for. There's no doubt about that. But there is this fundamental lack of safety that has come into her world, into her relationship, into the relationship with Alana, because now it's been spoken that this is not a more casual side quest relationship, that the relationship that Aubrey is building with Alana is like extremely significant. And I suppose this is why they are utilizing the term monogamy to try and describe both relationship, because they really want to justify them a little bit, I think, in terms of like the societal interpretation of this, like I think there's a part of using the term monogamy that's really about justifying and normalizing this dual relationship stream. And so I just really found it interesting in this moment because Aubrey spoke a lot about how, because he had recognized now that he wanted, or he was directed to have children with both women, that there was really no way back. And what I took that to mean was like there was no way back to the original closed sacred union marriage that he shared with Vylana. And I guess the question that came up for me was like, does that mean that if Vylana cannot say yes to the way in which you want to structure this relationship, that you would give up your relationship with Vylana in order to choose Alana? Because that's what it felt like was implied for me. Or maybe the implication was like he would choose Alana if she would agree to this relationship structure, and if not, then he would choose 2 other women completely, or more women completely. And so that just kind of hung in the air for me. I wasn't sure like what was the inference in that moment, in that statement. But it was just very interesting because at this moment, Mr. Gafni started talking again, and he was really going down this rabbit hole of like, well, in relationships, when eros collapses, so does ethics. Okay, which is fine as a talking point. But if we are saying that when eros collapses, so does ethics, then what actually sustains eros in a relationship? Is it effort? Is it dedication? Is it devotion? Is it creating newness within the container that you have? Or is it introducing new people that are interesting and create that eros from like a place that does not require effort? Because if that's the case, then it begs the question of like, okay, so do you only have eros in your relationship for X amount of years and then that dissipates and then you need a new person? Because I believe that Aubrey and Vylana have been married for about 5 years. And, it just kind of brought the question for me. It's like, does that mean that Alana will enter the picture? They'll have children. They'll be in a relationship for X amount of years. And then in 5 years time down the road, there will be this desire again for somebody new to create this feeling of eros again. And even though Gafni thought he was being smart bringing this up here, it just really created more questions than answers for me. Because it really brought up the question for me, like, well, why would that eros not eventually collapse with the new person? And so the thing about this podcast is, no matter how much beautiful, evocative language was used, no matter how many times we were told that it was God or Goddess or Isis that entered to give these messages, no matter how much mysticism was infused into this podcast to make us believe that it is something otherworldly, at the end of the day, the dynamic that's playing out in front of us feels so tired. It feels so age-old. It feels so cliched. Because ultimately, the story that we're seeing when we strip it all the way back is of a powerful, established man at the top of this totem pole with his desires that he is claiming for himself because he's always been told that he can have whatever he wants. He should always be selfish. He can always just take what he needs. And it's the story of the women that feel like they are underneath, where they are kind of like feeling these desires fall like bombs. And they are scrambling, they are moving, they are shape-shifting, they are accommodating, they're acquiescing. They are changing who they are and the life that they want in order to be with this man, in order to fulfill his desires. And I guess the end of that sentence feels like, because they were never truly taught, they have not fully in their heart of hearts gotten the message that they can also want what they want and not settle for part of that or less than what they want. And I think that's why this podcast, this revelation, this experience, this situation has caused such an impact inside of the spiritual community. Because in many ways, we're just seeing the same old tired thing play out, and it leaves women with so many questions, you know? Because where's the line in all of this, you know? Like, should we all be going out into the world, claiming what we desire boldly and taking what we want and not caring if the people around us are impacted by that and just going after whatever we need? And also, where's the line when you're in a relationship to compromise, to sacrifice? Like, I can't deny that there will be pieces of sacrifice that we will all make inside of a relationship. But I guess the question that came up for me around their relationship was like, what is the sacrifice that Aubrey is making? Because I could see quite clearly what sacrifices the women were making. And that's something that feels poignant. That's something that feels like it's really, you know, old. And I think the reason this feels so poignant right now is because we are in the middle of a collective upheaval in terms of our society and its structures. We are in a moment where women are really stepping forward to claim their power, to do the work, to understand our conditioning, to understand the ways that we've been taught to shrink ourselves and be less and to tolerate, especially inside of relationships. There's this question around competition and scarcity and like, can we trust other women? Can we be with other women? Like, can we be with men? What's happening inside of like the structures of relationships right now? Because if we're moving away from this patriarchal system where women are with men because without men we have nothing, we have no access to finances, we have no access to resources. Like if we are moving out of that paradigm and we're moving into a paradigm where we are self-sufficient and independent, then what is it that will bring us to relationships and what will keep us in relationships? And where are men going to also understand that for so long, for literally decades and centuries, for 5,000 years of patriarchy, women have been bending and breaking and shape-shifting and allowing and tolerating. And if this is the moment where that's going to stop, if that's going to end, then necessarily there's going to need to be more compromise, more sacrifice on the side of men in order to create relationships that are functional. And so it really feels like in this moment, so many women are just feeling like disillusioned. They're feeling betrayed because it feels like, how do I step forward and claim my power? How do I be independent and somebody that doesn't need a man? While also wanting a man, but wanting a man that will step forward and meet me halfway, you know? And so I think for many women, Aubrey Marcus became this talisman of possibility. Like he became the man that showed them that the love that they truly wanted was possible. That there are men out there that could choose to have open relationships and they could explore and they could be with many women and they could finally recognize it didn't actually fill their heart. That there was something lacking in the way that they were relating to themselves that they needed to heal. To see a man go out there into the world and do so much work on himself, to be somebody that was so devoted to his own evolution, that could meet the woman, that could meet the feminine in their strength, in their power, and to actually elevate the women that he was with. In many ways, women want to see models of love that prove to them that what they want is possible. Because I speak to so many clients that are like, I want this loyal, beautiful power match love. Like I want somebody that can love me as much as I love them, that can show up for me as much as I show up for them, that can be the man that would go through the muck and the fire just to like please me, to give me things that I didn't even know that I lost in my world. And so many women want that, and they're like, I think there's this faltering of belief. And the faltering of belief is so painful because so often we're looking out into the world looking for, you know, models of good men, like men that are truly devoted and loyal and safe and truly honoring of the feminine. Because women are really hungry for that power match love, for that devotional sex, for that open heart, for that emotional availability, for that spiritual purpose, for that mission and heart that they want to share with their partner. And what we see online is like so many stories of men that have abused their power, that have abused their position, that have abused women. And it's something most women have experienced inside of a relationship, in whatever way that showed up. Being diminished or being made to feel like you should be smaller, being abused, being hurt, being left behind, being ghosted, being abandoned, not having somebody that can show up in the depth that you want to experience in your relationships. And so there's so many women out there looking for this proof that the man that they dream of is actually real. This man that truly honors the feminine, that chooses her fully in his words, in his heart, in his actions, in the way that he moves through the world, in the man that he's willing to become for her. We actually are looking for men that would choose us not just when we are small and compliant and shape-shifting and making ourselves little and acquiescing to whatever they want, but also men that can handle the woman that we want to become, that we are becoming in this time. Because so many women out there are doing the work right now, right? Like we are out there, we are doing the work, we are becoming sovereign, we are becoming in connection with our magic and our power. We're becoming in connection with our authenticity. We truly are wanting to become this woman that can be a queen in this world, to no longer be a servant to the men around us. And I think this is why watching this saga play out with Vylana has been really painful for a lot of women in the spiritual community, because Vylana has also become a talisman. She's become a woman that we saw go from this space of dating in polyamorous relationships she didn't really want, in this place of suffering, in this place of maybe being disconnected from herself. And we saw this journey of her becoming this powerful queen. She's so embodied. She's so in herself. She's so connected to herself from what we can see, right? And I don't take any of that away from her if she is making choices out of alignment right now, because it's always happening in layers. I've been on my healing journey for probably about 6 or 7 years now, and there are just layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. Every time I feel like I reach a point of truly knowing myself, truly being in connection, truly loving myself, there's always more to go. But I think there's this element of seeing Vylana do this work of stepping into herself, being bold and magical and out there and sexual and sensual and just so incredibly alive. And then we saw her getting met, chosen, cherished. It felt like proof. It felt like proof that if you truly dedicate yourself to your own healing, to your own evolution, to your own expansion, if you will be able to raise yourself to a point where you no longer abandon yourself and shrink and settle, then you will finally be met at the top of those stairs by a man that is your power match, that's your equal, that will choose you fully, that you can actually have at the end of this journey the relationship, the love, the care that you truly desire in this world. And maybe that's the part of it. We think that this journey is about the payoff we're going to get at the end. Why are we healing in this world? Are you healing because you want to be healed? Do you want to improve the relationship with yourself? Or are you doing this because you're once I heal, once I get better, then I'll be worthy of being chosen? And it really feels like there's this dichotomy, because so often, we're here really for the prize. A lot of the time, healing is about getting to where we're going. The love, the relationship, the sex, the king. Instead of acknowledging that the healing that we're doing is for ourselves. It's for us to reconnect to ourselves. It's for us to be able to move through life in a more peaceful way. It's to actually heal for our lineage so that we're not passing down this same trauma, so that we can break the cycle that we hold around the pain and the fear and the conditioning that we hold. And so I really feel watching this situation unfold has really felt like it cracked something very tender in women. Because there's this undercurrent of like how we were actually taught we needed to be as women. We needed to stay small. We needed to be tolerant. We had to accept men and allow their bad behavior and just like stay and stay and stay and stay and stay. We ultimately had to choose the other over ourselves always. Abandoning ourselves in the process, abandoning our truth, abandoning our desires, abandoning our life and ourselves sometimes. Giving up everything that we actually desire to be or to have in this world for the greater good. And I really felt like that was something that came up a lot in this relationship. It's like, what will you sacrifice was the question that Gafni kept on asking. What will you sacrifice? What will you sacrifice? What will you sacrifice? And I know there was a part of me that heard that and was like, well, what the fuck is everybody else sacrificing? Women have been asked to sacrifice their whole entire goddamn life. Over and over and over. Sacrifice for your brother. Do the cleanup. Pick up the slack. Sacrifice for your boyfriend. Step over your boundaries. Have sex with him. Give him what he wants so he'll choose you. Over and over, like, who's going to sacrifice? Sacrifice your body. Sacrifice yourself. Sacrifice your career to have kids. Sacrifice everything you've built to move across the country with a man for his job because that's the priority. Sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. And women have done it. For generations we've done it. I watched my mother do it. I watched my grandmother do it. I know that my whole lineage has done it. Women are very familiar with sacrifice. Very, very familiar with sacrifice. And so this podcast really brought up this question of like, are we forever going to be asked to compromise our needs, our values, the things that we actually want in order to be loved by a man? Can we even trust that there are men out there that can let go of the indoctrinated selfishness and dominance and ego that they hold so that they can love us the way that we need to be loved, so that they can meet us at the bridge, so that we can actually create relationships that are functional and beautiful and generative for everyone, where everyone is getting their desires met, but it doesn't cost one party so much of herself that she feels like the dynamic doesn't actually feed her any longer. Is it ever going to be safe enough for a woman to truly let go and surrender to love? Or will I always have to keep one eye open when I sleep? Forever guarded, forever waiting for that other shoe to drop. Forever fearing that I will be hit out of left field, even when I open and surrender and trust. And so this podcast, this situation really felt like the retelling of an age-old story. It's another space in which women have held this hope that somehow, someday, this man, this beautiful masculine can rise up and meet them. And this fear that actually every time love evolves and changes and expands, it's still going to require that she is sacrificing, that she is actually the one that is giving up parts of herself in order to satisfy the man. That ultimately so much of the evolution of love is actually still evolutions of the same patriarchal ideas and desires that are preying on women, that are preying on our fear of abandonment, that are preying on our lack of self-worth, that are preying on all of the fears and challenges that we're struggling with and trying so hard to evolve out of. There's this deep core wound that so many feminine beings hold. They're never truly going to be enough. That the man in front of them will always want more women. That his ego will never be satisfied by their love, no matter how deep, no matter how pure, no matter how true. And it's this fear that like, I used to be loved, but I had to be small and compliant and dim and not so shiny. And so now what happens if I turn into this beautiful, magnetic, radiant version of myself, and then I'm also too much for the men out there? And so this moment really brings forward this collective feminine grief that we hold for the ways in which we had to sacrifice in the past and the ways that we're still being asked to sacrifice now. When women are coming into themselves and desiring so much to be met by men that don't excuse the impact of their actions, by a king that actually has words that align with his actions, values that align with his choices, and power that actually is rooted in his responsibility to not only the woman in his life, but the life, the relationship that they are co-creating. And maybe the thing that we really want is to be real with ourselves, to stop actually quietly sacrificing ourselves at the altar of the man, the child, the family, the greater good. Maybe what we actually want is to be selfish in this moment in the world. Maybe we want to be the ones that are claiming our desires so outrageously and letting the chips fall where they may, walking away from people, walking away from relationships, walking away from structures that no longer serve us. And so there's so many layers to what we're watching unfold in front of us. Because ultimately, connection is why we're here. So many women and men desire this deep connection that feels out of reach right now. Because there's so much swirling, there's so much happening, there's so much reshuffling and reshifting of the way in which relationships look and the structures that uphold them. And we're trying to find the balance between selfishness and self-honoring, relationship and sacrifice, love and truth. And these things can be difficult to hold in relationship to other people. They require both parties giving and taking at a similar level. And right now, we still live in a world that's impacted by conditioning that is very different for young men and young women. Women are really conditioned to be small and compliant. And no matter how much a woman can hustle and grind in the world and create success and be powerful, there is still this collapse that can happen inside of relationships. And this is why so much of the work that I do with women is around the collapse that they find inside of their relationships, inside of their heartbreak. Because I promise you, if you are finding that collapse, that lack of self-worth, that lack of self-honoring, that self-abandonment in your relationship, I can promise you, you will find echoes of it everywhere else in your life. The thing about our relationships is that they are a microcosm of our struggles that we are holding in and of ourselves, in the ways that we don't quite love ourselves, in the ways we don't quite value ourselves, the way we don't self-honor, the way we're willing to sacrifice and self-abandon for others, the ways that we've been conditioned to move through the world, to be smaller, to shrink, to tolerate. And so when you're willing to acknowledge those things inside of your relationship, it allows you to transform things in a way that you never thought possible. Because truly what we really want is to become a version of ourselves that will not shrink for love, that will not disown our values for love or success or for what other people want, where we become a woman that no longer performs or shapeshifts, who no longer allows themselves to become what other people want in order to be loved or chosen or to belong, to actually become the woman that in all aspects of her life can claim her authentic truth. Because at the end of the day, so much of this conversation is like, where is the authentic truth? And that's something we will only see over time. We have no idea what these people truly want or truly feel, and we have only gotten such a small glimpse inside of this podcast. But the resonance that's alive in so many women and men right now is the thing that we're truly talking about. So what does it bring up for you? Where are the places inside of this podcast or inside of this situation that you felt moments of tenderness, where you felt your heart beat a little faster, where you felt your heart break that little bit with the resonance? Because answering those questions, having that acknowledgement of those places where your heart aches, is actually what's going to lead you to the healing that will allow you to truly step forward from this place. And so I leave you with those questions. Where is the aching in your heart that's coming from the resonance that you found in this podcast? Where are those tender parts of you that hold fear around what's possible for you in love, in relationships, in the life that you're creating? Where do you find echoes of that pain, of that shape-shifting, of that sacrifice that you're actually choosing in your life right now, not just in your relationships? Because in many ways, what we truly want is to still believe. Because your belief is this rebellion against what they told you you had to accept in your life, in your love, in your relationships, in order to be loved, in order to be chosen, in order to belong. Your desire is a reclamation of the life that you're actually meant to live. The power match love, the sacred sex, the undeniable truth, the career that impacts thousands, the mission that you're here to live in this world, the finances, the beauty, the abundance that you're here to experience. Your belief is everything when it comes to having the life that you truly want to live. And that's why continuing to believe, no matter what happens in the world out there, no matter how many times you look for proof and you can find none, to keep believing then, to keep choosing yourself over and over then, that's the thing that changes absolutely everything in this world. And that's what I want for you. And that's why the work of healing is so goddamn powerful. Because then you become the one that is choosing and creating the life that you truly want to live in every single choice you make. And so if you've enjoyed this podcast, I would love for you to rate, review, and share it with somebody that you think would enjoy it. It really allows us to get the word out there, to share this vision and mission with other people in the world, and to really move into a space in this world where we are truly all evolving in the direction of being fully, honestly, authentically ourselves. And if you want to find out more about the work that I do with women inside of The Essentialist, you can always go onto my website at www.alaskawolf.com and find all of the details there. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I've been Alaska Wolf, and you've been listening to the Heartbreak Alchemy Podcast.